The moment that destroyed my marriage wasn't finding suspicious text messages, wasn't discovering secret credit card charges, wasn't walking in on my husband with another woman. It was my 8-year-old son Tyler calling me from the school office at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice broken with tears and confusion as he sobbed, "Mommy, where's Daddy? Mrs. Peterson says I'm the last kid here, but I saw Daddy's car drive right past the school pickup line, and he didn't stop. There was a lady in the car with him, and they were laughing, but he didn't see me waving at him." The devastation in my child's voice as he tried to understand why his father had abandoned him at school. Why the parent who had promised to pick him up had instead driven past with someone else, prioritizing their own entertainment over their son's safety and emotional security, made my blood boil with protective rage because I knew Tyler had been standing at that pickup spot for over an hour, watching hopefully for the car that would never stop for him. When I asked Tyler if he was absolutely sure it was Daddy's car, his response shattered 12 years of trust with the heartbroken certainty that only a child's innocent observation could provide. "Same blue car, same license plate, Mommy, but he had a different lady with him, and they looked like they were having so much fun together while I was just waiting and getting scared." In that instant, listening to my son's confusion and abandonment, I realized that my husband hadn't just forgotten about school pickup or gotten caught in traffic. He had actively chosen to drive past his own child, had seen Tyler waiting, and decided that whatever he was doing with his companion was more important than fulfilling the most basic responsibility of parenthood, turning my innocent boy into collateral damage in his systematic betrayal of everything a father should represent. The image Tyler painted of his father's car driving past the school while he waited hopefully at the pickup spot wasn't just heartbreaking. It was emblematic of the kind of calculated cruelty that goes beyond mere neglect, into active emotional abuse of a child whose only crime was trusting that his parent would keep their word. Tyler described how he had watched the familiar blue sedan approach the school at the right time, how his excitement had turned to confusion and then to heartbreak as the car continued past the pickup line without slowing down, how he had waved frantically, hoping to catch his father's attention, but had only been able to watch as the car disappeared around the corner, carrying his father and an unknown woman toward whatever entertainment they had prioritized over his safety and emotional well-being. What made Tyler's abandonment particularly devastating was the timeline he provided, the innocent precision with which he recounted the events that revealed not just forgetfulness or poor planning, but deliberate choice to prioritize his own gratification over his child's basic needs. "I got out of after-school program at 3:30 like always. Mommy and I waited by the flagpole like Daddy told me to. But all the other kids got picked up and I was still there. And Mrs. Peterson kept asking if I was okay. And I kept saying Daddy was coming because he promised he would be there." The casual cruelty of making a promise to an 8-year-old boy and then breaking it so completely, so publicly, with such obvious disregard for the emotional impact on a child who trusted unconditionally, revealed a level of selfishness that was breathtaking in its callousness. For 12 years, I had built my life around supporting my husband David's career and maintaining the kind of stable, nurturing family environment that would give Tyler the security and consistency that every child deserves. David's work in commercial real estate required irregular hours and frequent client meetings, but we had always managed family responsibilities through careful coordination and mutual reliability, ensuring that Tyler never felt abandoned or deprioritized, despite the demands of building a successful business. I had structured my own career as a part-time graphic designer around David's schedule, accepting smaller projects and reduced income so that I could handle the majority of childcare responsibilities while still contributing to our family's financial stability and maintaining my professional identity. The family system we had created was built on trust and dependability, with both of us understanding that Tyler's needs came first, regardless of our individual priorities or professional obligations. David had always seemed committed to this principle, attending school events and sports activities, maintaining consistent pickup and drop-off schedules, showing the kind of engaged parenting that made me proud of our partnership and confident that Tyler was receiving the attention and security he needed to thrive. Our friends regularly commented on what a devoted father David appeared to be, how well he balanced work demands with family commitments, how lucky Tyler was to have a dad who prioritized his emotional well-being and academic success. But Tyler's heartbreaking phone call forced me to confront the possibility that while I had been maintaining family stability and managing our household responsibilities, David had been systematically neglecting his most basic parental duties in favor of activities and relationships that I knew nothing about. The school pickup that he had promised to handle, that we had discussed that very morning over breakfast, that Tyler had been counting on as part of his daily routine, had been abandoned without notice or explanation, while David pursued whatever entertainment had taken priority over his son's safety and emotional security. The most painful aspect of Tyler's abandonment wasn't just the logistical failure of missed pickup. It was the emotional cruelty of a child seeing his parent choose someone else's company over his own well-being, of an 8-year-old boy processing the visual evidence that his father's promises meant nothing when weighed against more interesting options. The fact that Tyler had actually seen David's car drive past, had witnessed his father making an active choice to continue past the school, while Tyler waited hopefully for rescue, added layers of betrayal and rejection that would affect his understanding of parental reliability and unconditional love for years to come. Before I tell you how I used Tyler's heartbreaking abandonment to expose David's systematic betrayal and protect our son's future, I need to ask you something that has haunted me since that devastating phone call from the school office. Have you ever received a call from your child who was stranded and confused because the parent who promised to be there had instead prioritized their own entertainment over their child's safety and emotional security? Have you ever realized that while you were maintaining family stability and managing domestic responsibilities, your partner was actively failing to meet the most basic standards of parental reliability and commitment? If you've ever felt like you were the only parent truly invested in your child's emotional well-being, if you've ever wondered whether your partner's promises to your children were genuine commitments or convenient lies that could be broken whenever something more appealing presented itself, subscribe to this channel now, because what I discovered after Tyler's devastating abandonment at school isn't just about neglect. It's about how some people can use parenthood as performance while treating their actual parental responsibilities as optional conveniences that can be ignored whenever personal gratification takes priority. The investigation that followed my son's heartbreaking phone call will change how you think about parental reliability, about family commitments, about the difference between people who protect their children's emotional security and people who sacrifice it for their own selfish pursuits and hidden agendas. The conversation I had with Tyler when I arrived at school to collect him was one of the most heartbreaking and revealing discussions of my life, requiring me to extract information about what he had witnessed, while also providing comfort and reassurance to a child who had been traumatized by his father's abandonment and betrayal of trust. Tyler's account of the afternoon's events painted a picture that was both devastating in its emotional impact and illuminating in what it revealed about David's character and priorities, and being collected by parents who arrived on time and fulfilled their obligations. How his excitement had gradually turned to worry as the minutes passed and the pickup area emptied around him. I kept looking for Daddy's car, Mommy, because he told me this morning that he would be there right after school program ended, and he said we might even stop for ice cream if he finished his work meeting early enough. The casual cruelty of making promises to generate excitement and cooperation from a child, then breaking those promises without notice or explanation, revealed someone who viewed his son's emotional well-being as a tool for manipulation, rather than a sacred trust to be protected. But the most devastating detail Tyler shared was his description of actually seeing David's car approach the school, of the hope and joy that had filled his heart as he prepared to run toward his father, only to watch in confusion and heartbreak as the car continued past without stopping. "I saw him talking to the pretty lady next to him, Mommy, and they were both smiling and laughing like they were having the best time. But when I waved really big so he would see me, he just kept driving like I wasn't even there." The image of an 8-year-old boy frantically waving at his father's car while being completely ignored in favor of entertaining a woman Tyler had never met was devastating in its clarity about David's priorities and character. Tyler's innocent questions about why his father had been with someone else when he was supposed to be picking him up from school revealed the extent to which David had been compartmentalizing his life, treating his parental responsibilities as separate from and less important than his personal entertainment and romantic pursuits. "Who was the lady with Daddy, Mommy? Why was she there instead of you when Daddy was supposed to be doing kid stuff? Do you think maybe Daddy forgot about me because he was having too much fun with her?" Each question was a knife to my heart, evidence that my son was trying to make sense of adult betrayal and abandonment that violated everything he had been taught about family loyalty and parental love. The school staff who had witnessed Tyler's abandonment provided additional context that painted an even more disturbing picture of David's systematic neglect and disregard for our son's emotional well-being. Mrs. Peterson, the after-school program coordinator, explained that Tyler had been increasingly anxious about pickup times in recent weeks, asking repeatedly about whether his daddy would remember to come get him, expressing worry that seemed unusual for a child who had previously been confident about his parents' reliability and commitment. "He's been asking me every day if his daddy loves him enough to come pick him up," which broke my heart, because no 8-year-old should have to worry about whether their parent will show up for them. The pattern that emerged from these conversations with school personnel was even more damaging than the single incident of abandonment that had prompted Tyler's devastating phone call. David had been increasingly unreliable about pickup and drop-off responsibilities, frequently arriving late without explanation, sometimes sending last-minute messages, canceling commitments, occasionally simply failing to show up without any communication at all. The school had been covering for his negligence by keeping Tyler in extended care and calling me to handle emergencies, but they had been growing concerned about the emotional impact on Tyler of his father's increasing unreliability and apparent disregard for basic parental responsibilities. But the most heartbreaking revelation came from Tyler himself, who began sharing other instances when his father had disappointed or abandoned him in favor of activities that served David's personal interests rather than his son's emotional needs. "Remember when Daddy was supposed to come to my baseball game, but he said he had to work instead? But then I saw him at the restaurant with the same pretty lady when we drove past after the game was over." The casual way Tyler mentioned this observation, the matter-of-fact acceptance of his father's lies and broken promises, revealed that David's abandonment and betrayal had become so routine that Tyler was learning to expect disappointment, rather than reliability from the parent who should have been his most consistent source of security and unconditional love. The private investigator I hired to document David's activities during the time he should have been fulfilling his parental responsibilities provided professional confirmation of what Tyler's observations and my own growing suspicions had revealed, but also uncovered layers of systematic deception that painted an even more comprehensive picture of his betrayal. The woman Tyler had seen in David's car was named Jennifer Walsh, a marketing executive who worked with several of David's commercial real estate clients, someone he had been dating for over 8 months while maintaining the facade of committed husband and father. The surveillance evidence revealed that David and Jennifer had been conducting their relationship during times when he was supposed to be caring for Tyler or attending family activities, using his parental responsibilities as cover for romantic pursuits that required him to abandon or neglect his son on a regular basis. The afternoon when Tyler was stranded at school corresponded to a romantic lunch that had extended into evening plans, with David prioritizing his personal entertainment over his child's safety and emotional security, without apparent concern for the impact of his choices on an innocent 8-year-old who trusted him completely. But the most damaging evidence was the discovery that David had been systematically lying to Tyler about his availability and priorities, making promises he had no intention of keeping while using his son's disappointment and confusion as acceptable casualties in his pursuit of romantic excitement with someone who had never made any commitment to Tyler's well-being or emotional security. Text messages between David and Jennifer revealed conversations that mocked Tyler's neediness and his emotional reactions to being abandoned, treating an 8-year-old child's legitimate need for parental reliability as an inconvenience that interfered with their romantic activities. My sister Rachel, who had always been Tyler's favorite aunt and most protective advocate, was horrified not just by David's infidelity, but by the systematic nature of his emotional abuse toward Tyler. His willingness to use parental responsibilities as cover for personal activities while treating his son's emotional needs as optional conveniences that could be ignored whenever something more entertaining presented itself. Her response was immediate and fierce. "He's not just cheating on you. He's systematically abusing Tyler by teaching him that parental love is conditional on convenience, that he can't depend on the people who are supposed to protect him most." Rachel's background in child psychology provided crucial insights into the long-term damage that David's pattern of abandonment and broken promises could cause to Tyler's emotional development and his ability to trust relationships in the future. She explained that children who experience systematic abandonment by parents often develop anxiety disorders, attachment issues, and fundamental doubts about their own worth and lovability that can affect every relationship they form throughout their lives. The fact that Tyler was beginning to blame himself for his father's unreliability, wondering if he wasn't important enough or lovable enough to merit David's attention and commitment, indicated that serious psychological damage was already occurring. The strategy Rachel helped me develop was designed not just to expose David's affair, but to document the systematic nature of his emotional abuse toward Tyler, to demonstrate that his neglect and abandonment of parental responsibilities constituted child abuse that required immediate intervention and protection. We decided to gather comprehensive evidence of David's pattern of broken promises and abandoned commitments while ensuring that Tyler received professional support to process the trauma of systematic parental rejection and abandonment. The confrontation with David became inevitable when Tyler tearfully asked me why his daddy didn't love him enough to keep promises, why the pretty lady in Daddy's car was more important than picking him up from school, whether there was something wrong with him that made his father choose other people's company over spending time with his own son. The heartbreaking self-blame in Tyler's questions, his internalization of his father's abandonment as evidence of his own inadequacy, rather than David's cruelty, forced me to realize that protecting my son from further emotional abuse required immediate action regardless of the personal cost or family disruption. The confrontation took place on a Thursday evening after Tyler was asleep. When David returned home from what he claimed was a successful client dinner, but which I now knew had been another romantic evening with Jennifer, while our son struggled with homework alone and wondered why his father had broken another promise about helping him with his science project, I presented David with evidence of his systematic abandonment of Tyler, surveillance photos of his activities with Jennifer during times when he was supposed to be parenting, documentation of the emotional damage his behavior was causing to an innocent child who deserved protection rather than neglect. David's response to being confronted with irrefutable evidence of his emotional abuse toward Tyler was even more disturbing than his infidelity, revealing someone who viewed his son's needs as inconvenient obstacles to his personal happiness rather than sacred responsibilities that defined his character as a father and human being. Instead of expressing remorse for the pain he had caused Tyler or concern about the psychological damage his abandonment was creating, David became defensive and angry, attacking me for spying on him and Tyler for being too sensitive and overly dramatic about missed pickups and broken promises. Tyler needs to learn that the world doesn't revolve around him. And maybe if you didn't baby him so much, he wouldn't fall apart every time something doesn't go exactly according to plan, David said, as if systematic abandonment and emotional neglect were valuable life lessons rather than child abuse disguised as parenting philosophy. I work hard to provide for this family, and I deserve to have some personal time in adult relationships, without being guilt-tripped by an 8-year-old who doesn't understand that parents have needs and priorities beyond catering to children's every whim and emotional demand. The casual cruelty of this response, the complete absence of parental instinct or protective love, the willingness to blame an innocent child for having normal needs for reliability and emotional security, showed me exactly who I had been married to for 12 years, and exactly what kind of father Tyler had been trying so desperately to please and trust. David wasn't just neglecting his parental responsibilities. He was actively teaching Tyler that his needs didn't matter, that promises made to children could be broken without consequence, that parental love was conditional on convenience rather than unconditional commitment to a child's well-being. His explanation for the affair was equally revealing in its selfishness and disregard for the impact on Tyler's emotional development. Jennifer represented adult sophistication and intellectual stimulation that he claimed our family life couldn't provide, someone who appreciated his professional success and personal qualities without the burdens and limitations that came with parental responsibilities and domestic obligations. She doesn't need constant reassurance and attention the way Tyler does, and she understands that successful relationships require both people to have interesting lives outside of each other's emotional demands and expectations. The most chilling aspect of David's confession was his assumption that Tyler's emotional needs were optional burdens, rather than fundamental requirements for healthy child development, that his son's reactions to abandonment and broken promises were character flaws, rather than normal responses to systematic emotional abuse. He spoke about Tyler as if our son were a needy roommate, rather than an innocent child whose emotional security and understanding of unconditional love depended entirely on the consistency and reliability of his parents' commitment to his well-being. The legal proceedings that followed David's exposure were swift and decisive, largely because family courts have extensive experience recognizing patterns of child emotional abuse disguised as parenting philosophy. And judges are particularly protective of children whose basic needs for security and reliability have been systematically violated by parents who prioritize personal gratification over parental responsibility. The evidence of David's pattern of abandonment, broken promises, and emotional neglect painted a clear picture of someone whose judgment about parenting priorities was so fundamentally compromised that supervised visitation was necessary to protect Tyler from further psychological damage. The custody arrangement that emerged from our divorce reflected the court's understanding that David had demonstrated a willingness to use Tyler's emotional needs as bargaining chips in his pursuit of personal happiness, that his systematic abandonment of parental responsibilities constituted emotional abuse that required immediate intervention and ongoing monitoring. The judge was particularly concerned about the long-term psychological impact of David's behavior on Tyler's development and his ability to form healthy relationships based on trust and reliability rather than anxiety and conditional acceptance. But the most satisfying outcome wasn't the legal resolution. It was watching David realize that his plan to maintain his family life while pursuing his relationship with Jennifer had been completely destroyed by his own cruelty and carelessness toward the innocent child who should have been his highest priority. Jennifer, who had believed she was dating a successful businessman with manageable family obligations, was horrified to discover that her relationship with David had been built on the systematic emotional abuse of an 8-year-old boy who had been abandoned and neglected so that his father could prioritize romantic entertainment over basic parental responsibilities. The revelation that David had been willing to traumatize his own son to teach Tyler that parental love was conditional and unreliable, to use an innocent child's trust as a tool for facilitating his affair, was more than Jennifer's conscience could tolerate. Her decision to end their relationship left David facing the consequences of his choices alone. Without the family he had abandoned, or the mistress he had prioritized over his child's emotional well-being, without the son whose love he had taken for granted, or the woman whose affection he had pursued at the cost of destroying an innocent child's sense of security and unconditional parental love. At this point in my story, I need to pause and ask you something that still shapes my understanding of parental responsibility and child protection. If you discovered that your spouse had been systematically abandoning and emotionally abusing your child, teaching them that parental love was conditional and unreliable, using their innocent trust as a tool for facilitating personal betrayal of family commitments, what would you do? Would you focus on protecting your child from further emotional damage, even if it meant disrupting family stability and challenging someone who refused to acknowledge their abusive behavior? Would you prioritize documentation and legal proceedings to ensure that the pattern of abandonment was officially recognized and addressed? Or would you focus immediately on therapeutic intervention to help your child process the trauma of systematic parental rejection? Would you seek consequences severe enough to prevent further abuse? Or would you focus on healing and building a family environment where your child could learn to trust again after having their most basic needs for security systematically violated? Tell me in the comments what you think you would choose, because the decisions I made about handling David's comprehensive betrayal of Tyler affected not just our family structure, but our son's fundamental understanding of whether he was worthy of unconditional love and reliable commitment from the people who claim to care about him most. The strategy I developed for rebuilding our lives after David's systematic abuse focused on helping Tyler understand that his father's abandonment and broken promises reflected David's character, flaws rather than any inadequacy or unworthiness on Tyler's part. That children deserve parents who keep their commitments and prioritize their emotional security above all personal conveniences and entertainment. The goal was to help Tyler process his father's rejection without internalizing it as evidence of his own lack of value, to rebuild his understanding of what parental love should look like, to create an environment where he could learn to trust again after having his most basic assumptions about family reliability systematically violated. The therapy sessions that became central to Tyler's healing process were designed to help him understand that parents who abandon their children or break promises to them are failing in their responsibilities rather than teaching valuable life lessons, that his emotional needs for security and reliability were normal and healthy rather than burdensome or excessive, that the adults who truly cared about his well-being would prioritize his safety and happiness above their own convenience or entertainment. The child psychologist we worked with specialized in helping children who had been emotionally abused by parents, teaching Tyler that his worth wasn't determined by his father's willingness to show up for him, that love shouldn't be something children had to earn through perfect behavior or minimal emotional needs. But the most important healing came from the conversations Tyler and I had about the difference between people who make reliable commitments and people who make convenient promises, between adults who protect children's emotional security and adults who sacrifice it for personal gratification, between love that is unconditional and dependable versus affection that is conditional on convenience and personal priorities. Tyler learned that real parental love means showing up even when it's inconvenient, keeping promises even when something more entertaining presents itself, prioritizing a child's emotional needs above adult desires for personal freedom or romantic excitement. The transformation in Tyler following our family's restructuring was gradual but profound, reflecting the relief that comes from living with a parent whose commitments were genuine rather than conditional, whose love was demonstrated through consistent actions rather than convenient promises that could be broken whenever something more appealing presented itself. The anxiety he had developed about whether people would show up for him, the constant worry about whether he was important enough to merit reliable attention and care, began to fade as he learned that some adults could actually be trusted to keep their word and prioritize his well-being above their own entertainment. The new traditions Tyler and I created together were built on foundations of absolute reliability rather than convenient promises, on commitments that were sacred rather than optional, on love that was demonstrated through consistent presence rather than performed through sporadic gestures that served adult emotional needs more than child security. Our daily routines became opportunities to demonstrate that promises made to children were binding contracts rather than casual suggestions, that Tyler's emotional needs were priorities rather than inconveniences, that his trust in parental reliability was something to be treasured and protected rather than exploited and violated. The community of support that formed around Tyler and me, once the truth about David's systematic abuse became known, included other families who had experienced similar patterns of child abandonment, disguised as parenting philosophy, other children who had been taught that their emotional needs were burdens rather than legitimate requirements for healthy development. We connected with families where one parent had been systematically failing to meet basic standards of reliability and commitment while the other parent worked to maintain stability and security for children, who deserved better than conditional love and convenient promises. The professional success I achieved after freeing myself from a marriage that required me to compensate constantly for someone else's parental failures was remarkable in ways that surprised everyone who knew me. Without the constant stress of managing David's unreliability and covering for his abandoned commitments, without the emotional drain of trying to explain his behavior to a confused and hurt child, I discovered energy and creativity that allowed me to expand my graphic design work into a thriving business that provided both financial independence and flexible scheduling that truly served Tyler's needs, rather than simply accommodating someone else's selfish priorities. The advocacy work I began, focusing on protecting children from emotional abuse disguised as parenting philosophy, became a passion that gave meaning to the trauma Tyler and I had experienced together. Our story became part of a larger conversation about recognizing patterns of child emotional abuse, about understanding that systematic abandonment and broken promises constitute serious psychological harm, about creating better systems for protecting children, whose basic needs for security and reliability are being systematically violated by parents who prioritize personal gratification over parental responsibility. The writing I began about child emotional abuse and the importance of parental reliability gave me a platform to reach families who might be struggling with similar patterns of abandonment and broken commitments. Parents who might not recognize that their children's emotional needs were being systematically violated by partners who treated parental responsibilities as optional conveniences rather than sacred obligations. The response from readers was consistently gratitude for validation that their children's needs for reliability and commitment were legitimate and important, that patterns of parental abandonment constituted serious emotional abuse that required intervention and protection. 2 years after Tyler's heartbreaking phone call from school destroyed our understanding of our family, but ultimately saved him from continued emotional abuse disguised as parenting, I can say with certainty that children's trust in parental reliability is one of the most precious and fragile gifts they offer. That adults who violate that trust through systematic abandonment and broken promises are committing crimes against innocence that can affect their children's emotional development for decades. That protecting children sometimes means choosing their security over family stability when those two values come into irreconcilable conflict. Tyler, now 10 years old and thriving in an environment where his emotional needs are consistently prioritized and his trust in adult reliability has been carefully rebuilt, has internalized lessons about what healthy relationships look like that will protect him throughout his life. He knows that people who truly love him will show up when they promise to, that his needs for security and attention are normal and healthy, rather than burdensome or excessive, that real love is demonstrated through consistent actions, rather than convenient promises that can be broken whenever something more entertaining presents itself. The relationship Tyler has with his father now is limited and carefully structured to protect him from further emotional damage while acknowledging the reality that some parents are simply not capable of providing the kind of unconditional love and reliable commitment that children need and deserve. David's attempts to rebuild trust with Tyler have been sporadic and self-serving, focused more on his own comfort than on the extensive therapeutic work required to repair the damage caused by years of systematic abandonment and broken promises. The most meaningful validation came from other children who had experienced similar patterns of parental abandonment and emotional abuse, kids who had been taught that their needs were burdens, and their trust was something that could be violated without consequence. Through support groups and family therapy, Tyler met other children who had waited hopefully for parents who never showed up, who had learned to expect disappointment rather than reliability from the adults who should have been their most consistent sources of security and unconditional love. The empty pickup spot where Tyler waited hopefully for a father who drove past without stopping has become a symbol in our family narrative of how parental reliability is the foundation upon which all other trust is built. How broken promises to children create wounds that affect every subsequent relationship. How the choice to prioritize personal entertainment over a child's emotional security reveals character flaws that extend far beyond simple selfishness into the realm of systematic emotional abuse. The school pickup line that once represented routine family responsibility has become, in Tyler's understanding, a place where promises are either kept or broken, where children learn whether the adults in their lives can be trusted to prioritize their safety and emotional well-being above personal convenience and entertainment. The fact that he had to watch his father actively choose someone else's company over fulfilling his parental obligations taught him. At 8 years old, that love could be conditional and unreliable, that the people who claimed to care about him most might abandon him without warning or explanation when something more appealing presented itself. The financial recovery process included not only the substantial divorce settlement that reflected David's systematic neglect of parental responsibilities, but also the peace of mind that came from knowing Tyler's future was secure and protected from anyone who would treat a child's emotional needs as optional burdens rather than fundamental requirements for healthy development. The money David had been spending on romantic dinners and entertainment with Jennifer while abandoning his son was now available for Tyler's therapy, education, and activities, for creating the kind of stable, reliable family environment where children could trust that promises made to them would be kept regardless of what other opportunities might present themselves to the adults responsible for their care. But the most profound transformation wasn't in our financial situation or custody arrangements. It was in our relationship with commitment itself. Our understanding that promises made to children are sacred contracts that reveal the character and integrity of the adults who make them. Tyler learned that real love is measured not by words or sporadic gestures but by consistent actions, by showing up when you say you will, by prioritizing a child's emotional security above adult convenience or entertainment, by treating parental responsibilities as joyful opportunities, rather than burdensome obligations that can be abandoned when something more interesting presents itself. The community response to our story was overwhelming in its support, but it also revealed how common it is for children to experience systematic